Good morning, everybody, et bonjour en français. It's my pleasure to speak with you again today, and the topic today is language diversity. And my name is Doug Hannum. So in Canada, we have two official languages, English and French. This is a source of great pride for Canadians because it's built into our society, and those two languages really form the framework of our society in Canada. And it certainly makes the world a smaller place. This morning we'll be talking about the benefits and challenges of speaking other languages and learning other languages. We'll be discussing the benefits, the challenge, and some things to consider if you're thinking about having your child participate in an immersion program or learn another language. We'll start first with the benefits. There's absolutely no question that learning another language improves your mother tongue. One of the ways it does that is there's usually a strong focus on grammar and understanding the language, which of course helps your mother tongue. Knowing more than one language also makes it easier to adapt to foreign countries. If we want to be completely practical about knowing another language, there's enough research that tells us that typically those people who know a second language usually can earn more money. And in the case of Canada, it opens up a world of job opportunities, particularly with the government. And you'll see from the slide that the government has over 67,000 bilingual jobs. A study by the University of Guelph recently showed that women who spoke French had earned 3.6% more income, and men who spoke French earned 6.6% more income. So again, practically, knowing a second language makes a difference in terms of salary. Personally, a couple of things to note. I consider myself fortunate to be bilingual. And in fact, my first language is French. It's my mother tongue, and that has made a great deal of difference for me. The other example that I use right now is I'm currently hiring someone who must be bilingual. It's part of the criteria. The position requires that this person speak French. I'll speak later about how that's a challenge. But again, that's an opportunity for those people who are bilingual to be able to have that job. So now we'll speak to the challenges. So mastering a second language takes a lot of commitment and reinforcement. And school is not enough to master the language. This is a good opportunity to mention immersion, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but it speaks to the benefits of looking at an immersion program if you are interested in your children, for example, learning French. There's absolutely no question that the immersion program is the way to go, and I'll speak to that a little bit later. The challenge with this is if they are not constantly exposed to that second language, they naturally revert to their mother tongue. And really, you can't blame them for doing that. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about immersion before we talk about other things to consider. In Toronto, where I am, there is a multitude of immersion programs. Probably the most successful is Toronto French School. One of the reasons for the tremendous success of the Toronto French School is that the students are not able to speak any other language other than French throughout the entire school day. That's reinforced when they're doing physical activity, as well as even playing at recess. Recess. Sorry about that. I haven't been to recess in a long time. So that's enforced in recess. So they are constantly in an environment where they have no choice other than to speak French. The other opportunity, and friends of mine have done this before, if not in school, they may have learned the language first in school through books, but what they've done to reinforce their knowledge and particularly the spoken language is they've actually done a French immersion program in Quebec. For example, a friend of mine spent 1 month in an isolated community where no one spoke English, and she lived with a family who only spoke French. It was a big challenge for her, but she had no choice but to adapt and speak the language. So it's another option, apart from the actual schooling, is to consider perhaps sending your child to, if it were to be French, to Quebec and really get immersed for a significant period of time. And it does make a significant difference. So we'll now move on to things to consider. So right from the beginning, and this is the benefit that I've had, is it's clearly been a great benefit to learn a second language or multiple languages when the student is at an early age. In my case, with French being my mother tongue, and I live in the city of Toronto, which is predominantly English, I really don't get an opportunity to speak much French. However, the fact that French is my mother tongue, I'm able to quickly start to speak French when I am in a situation that requires it. It may take a few hours for me to get back in the swing of things, but it doesn't take long before I'm conversing quite easily again in French. So all of this goes to show is I learned my French and my English at an early age, and that made that considerably easy. If there is a challenge with the French immersion program, even to this day, the textbooks that are used are textbooks from France. And of course, French language in France is somewhat different than French language in here in Canada, in particular Quebec. I'm sure you all experience this with languages. There are multiple dialects and multiple terms that are slightly different, and that's certainly the case here in Quebec. So it's a bit of a challenge when you are trying to learn the Quebecois version of French, which is obviously in Quebec, but you're using a textbook from France. So as much as we pride ourselves on the fact that Canada is a bilingual country, or most of the provinces are, the statistics are showing that the number of people who are bilingual is dropping. And that's a challenge, but it's also a benefit when you consider that if you were to learn French, then that makes you much more competitive when it comes to looking at jobs and other opportunities. Here in Canada, though, apart from English and French, Mandarin is the most spoken language, especially here in Ontario. So that's certainly of great assistance if you're looking at Ontario, Toronto for your children's education. Is obviously it'll be easier for them to adapt with the high number of people who speak Mandarin. But again, as we discussed, and part of the challenges is, well, if they're trying to learn that second language, you don't want them reverting to their mother tongue if you really want them to get to master it. So in summary, there are 3 points that you have there on the screen. There's no question whatsoever that knowing more than one language really does literally open up the world. A simple thing like travel, a language like French and English in particular, you can go to many, many countries in the world and you'll be able to get by quite easily with English and French. And of course, if you're talking about a third language like Mandarin, then the opportunities are that much greater. So it literally opens up the world for your children and to experience have new experiences. And of course, we've noted a number of the benefits from being multilingual, but we also note that there are academic challenges in maintaining languages. So in summary, of course, I'm biased because I spoke French first and no English, of course. I'm a strong proponent that if you're looking for your children to learn a second language, and in particular French, my advice to you would be to look at an immersion program, or if they studied French in school and you wanted to send them to an immersion environment for a period of time, I really do believe that that's the best way for your children to learn the language, for them to be exposed on a continual basis so that they gain that greater comfort. I have many friends who took French in high school here in Toronto, here in Ontario, and they may have passed the course, but they speak no French whatsoever. They may know a little bit of grammar, but because they weren't constantly exposed to it, because it was their second language, they never took it on. And as a result, never benefited from knowing that second language. So certainly immersion, in my opinion, is the way to go, and giving your children an opportunity to take advantage of that. Otherwise, I think that summarizes it and brings us to a close. Happy to take questions, and I do believe we have a holdover question from last night about sports. So we had a really good question from last night, and actually, just to give you some context, I actually run a national sports organization in Toronto, so I'm very familiar with sport and actually have worked in sport for the better part of my career. And the question related to whether or not it would be good for your children to experience different sports at an early age, and essentially try the sports at an early age, and then by the time they get to middle school or high school, they're in a position where they can decide what they'd like to continue to do. My answer to that is absolutely. It's far better for them to be exposed to different sports when they're younger, to try them out, to see if they have an aptitude, to see if they have the athletic ability to participate in that sport. Of course, every sport is a little bit different in terms of what's required from a eye-hand coordination perspective, but absolutely, it's better for them to try it out when they're young. And if there's something that they're either really good at or really enjoy, then they have opportunities to move on and continue that sport, whether it's an individual sport or a team sport, as they go through school. And the one final piece that I will add, and I'm sure you may have spoken to this last night, is there's many community opportunities outside of even school for your children to learn, to try out different sports. Pretty much every sport is offered at the community level, whether it's soccer, whether it's hockey, whether it's individual sports like tennis, golf. It doesn't always have to be in a school environment, so there's ample opportunity for children to learn those sports at an early age. So now I'll take any questions if there are about the immersion or about learning a second language. So with respect to if it was a choice between learning French or English, which is essentially the question, because certainly trying to learn 3 languages or 2 languages at the same time is impossible for anyone. I would have to say that English for sure would be the first choice, because English is so universally spoken over the world. If you were weighing between English and French, then I would have to say English first. What I might add is if you have a choice between English or French, and you consider a French immersion program, there's an easier opportunity to learn English, because if you're in Toronto, because it's spoken everywhere. So if you're in a French immersion program, they'll get the French down, and then when they're not in school, they'll have English. So as far as the question is concerned with confusion, we believe that it's not so much confusion as it is stress of having to take on that second language. Certainly at a young age, the stress of learning it is there. And what I've seen is that there is an initial period of stress, there's a struggle, but if the child hangs in there, if the parent hangs in there, then that disappears as they gain a greater comfort level with the language. So by all means, it's a challenge learning a second language at any age and at a young age, but I would say it had more to do with stress than anything else, and just getting through that period of stress. Once they get through that period, it can really make a difference. So as far as the question is concerned of starting French immersion up until grade 8 and then moving to English high school, I think that's a really good approach. Most of the research that I've seen, although there's some stress, does indicate that it's better to learn a language at an early age. So if you use the premise that they would learn their French at the younger age in an immersion situation, then when they move on to high school and they're immersed in English, I still think that they would retain a fair bit of the French because they learnt it, in this case we'll say second. And so I think that's a great way to go, that you start at a young age with French and then switch over to English in high school. And I've had friends of mine who've used that approach with their children, and it's been quite successful. With respect to the question of the person living in Montreal, fantastic city, by the way, I've spent a lot of time there, and whether it's better to go to a private French school or English school, of course, there are several choices for each. My experience is that the private school in Quebec, and that's where I did my studies, have a very strong French program. So I really don't think you can go wrong. There's more choice of private English schools than French schools in Montreal. But as I say, my experience is that the English schools have a very strong French curriculum. You won't get that immersion, but certainly you will get very strong French education at a English private school. For sure. So yeah, you really can't go wrong with the choice, whether it's English or French private school in Quebec.
我们非常感谢今天为我们带来的精彩